Hi everyone! Today in this video I'm going to talk about beautiful kingdom of plants. How do we classify our plants? I remember when I was a beginning gardener, I came to the big box store to look at the plants, and I saw this wonderful blooming blue plant, and I said, oh gosh, I will put it here and it will bloom all year round and it is going to be marvelous. Well, no, because that plant was an annual plant. And annual plants live only through the span of 1 year. I didn't know that. And of course that plant never came back because it was not hardy annual, it was a tender annual. And tender annuals have a hard time surviving through the winter outside. So this video is about that, the kingdom of plants. So the first well-beloved group of plants which we can grow in our garden are annuals. And what are annuals? Annuals are plants which grow, create flower, create seeds, drop that seed to the ground or in our hands, and they die. So their root system are not designed to support the plant through the winter, and next year the plant is not going to come up again, only the seed of the plant will germinate. So this is the definition of annuals. In my garden, on this porch, the best presented annual is marigolds. Look at these beautiful buttercup marigolds. They are basically blooming themselves away all the way since the end of spring, and they are doing very well. I raised them from seeds myself. In February I planted them, and they are in 5 different pots here, and they're just magnificent here, brightening up our back porch. Now, annuals consist of 3 different groups. Well, you can't really say that they're groups. 3 different varieties of annuals. Hardy annuals, half-hardy annuals, and tender annuals. Hardy annuals are annuals which basically take care of themselves outside. You don't need to do anything about them. You throw the seeds out, the plant grows, creates seeds, die in the fall, and next year those seeds live through the winter and they create another plant. Hardy annuals are very good. I usually love to do hardy annuals in my garden because they're fuss-free, you don't need to do anything about them. Now the second type of plant, which is half-hardy, and the next one would be tender. So these plants are annuals, but they cannot tolerate frost, so they basically live in warmer areas, in warmer climates. Right now I live in those 7, and these marigolds, if I would plant the seeds out in early spring or late winter, they're not going to germinate because it would be too cold for marigold to start growing in such cold conditions. So these tender annuals, half-hardy annuals need our help, and we usually store those seeds inside, and we either plant them out at the end of February and keep seedlings inside the house, and then when all the danger of frost disappears, we plant them out. For us, in our area, zone 7, the last frost date is April 15th, and that's the time when I planted these marigolds out, and they are thriving here. So that's the difference between hardy annuals and tender annuals, and in between them you have half-hardy annuals. Now, very often annuals can be perennials in warmer climates, but because we humans want to have it all, right? We want to have these beautiful flowers here. Some perennials which are growing in warmer climates as perennials here are treated as annuals. For example, this beautiful Verbena bonariensis, and it's a charming little thing. It's self-seeded here. I didn't do anything about it. It lived through the winter. You can consider it hardy annual, but it's not. It's actually a perennial, and it will survive and will germinate in the ground and will live The old plant will live in the ground through the winter from zone 7 up to 11. I just at the borderline of those 7, so I treat this Verbena bonariensis as a cute little annual because it performs so well during the first year of its life that here in our area it is treated as a beautiful annual. Now, when we talked about beautiful annuals, which are delighting our garden every year with color, and by the way, if you decide to buy annual plants every year, you can experiment with different seeds, or you can experiment with different pots which you will buy from the store, and you will know that next year you can plant something different if for whatever reason you don't like that particular annual. Now, next big beautiful class of plants in our gardens are perennials, and I must say that these are my favorites because perennials are very dependable. They come year after year, and the definition of perennial is the plant which lives in the ground for at least 3 years. And there are some long-lived perennials and some short-lived perennials. For example, this little black-eyed Susan, right now I trimmed it. I basically keep black-eyed Susan as a little cute little heap of beautiful leaves here, and the minute they start to look unsightly, I just trim them and keep them this way. I think they look very cute here. But black-eyed Susan is not very long-lived perennial, maybe 3 years, and it starts to decline. So, but it's a ferocious reseeder. It's a hardy perennial. So basically, black-eyed Susan will be living in this garden for many years to come, because it's very happy in this garden. Another example of beautiful perennials is my beautiful Vanessa Bell Rose. Just look how big it is here. This is her first year, and I let her set hips already, but she's still blooming. She doesn't want to stop blooming for the fall, and we have already approaching frost time coming, so I don't want her to have all these tender leaves being damaged by the frost. But what can you do? She wants to bloom. Very reliable bloomer here, but she is a good example of a perennial plant which has the root system in the ground, and that root system overwinters well. Everything on the top of the plant dies down, and then next year in spring the perennial plant has enough energy in its roots, and it shoots all the new fresh beautiful leaves in spring and delights us with beautiful nice foliage all over again in spring. So these are perennials. I stay away from tender perennials because I consider them too much work. For example, wonderful glorious dahlias. In our area here, after the first frost, you have to dig all the tubers out of the ground and bring them inside the house, which is a lot of work. And then next year you have to make sure that they are not damaged through the winter, they are not endangered by mice and whatnot if you're keeping them in the garage somewhere. And then next year you plant them out and you have your beautiful dahlias. So dahlias are example of wonderful tender perennials in our area. Now, another big class of plants which are very valuable in our garden are wonderful climbers. And of course, how can you underappreciate climbers? Climbers are a wonderful thing to have in our garden. First, because they don't take a lot of space. Just look at that spot. How much space on the ground that major wheel honeysuckle takes? Nothing. But it creates all the beautiful canopy on top and creates a lot of interest here on this beautiful arch which I made. So when you want to have an interesting garden, I highly encourage you to look into the class of climbers. And of course, my darling roses, I have several climbing roses, and they just delight us all in spring with its magnificent blooms. Another beautiful, wonderful class of plants which we definitely need to introduce into our gardens are wonderful shrubs. And shrubs are plants which do not have one trunk growing, and they can be evergreen, they can be deciduous, and they can be semi-evergreen. So evergreen plants, everybody knows of course, boxwoods, they do lose their leaves and their needles but they do it through the year and we really don't notice it. So there is no one time of the year that an evergreen shrub will lose its leaves and then we will notice all the bare skeleton of the stems. So evergreen shrubs are extremely important in our garden. And if you're a beginning gardener, I would highly recommend you to start studying shrubs first and introduce shrubs first into your garden, because they are the backbone of the garden. When these little guys, all of them will die, all our wonderful pampered perennials, when they die to the ground in the fall, what do we have? We have this wonderful wall of green to rely on. And this will keep the structure of the garden going through the winter days, because if we have only annuals and perennials on the ground and all of them die in the fall, what are we left with this boring field of nothing? But if we have these wonderful shrubs and trees, of course, then we have some interest in the garden. Now, deciduous shrubs are shrubs which drop their leaves in the fall, and we have plenty of them. They do have an important role in our gardens. They can be wonderful. For example, this deciduous shrub, this is my beautiful butterfly bush. And of course, after the first frost, the leaves starts to fall down and the butterfly bush stoically stand as a nice deciduous shrub, and we can see all the formation of its branches through the winter. So what I do, I go into the winter and I nicely give it a big major haircut, taking basically all this down to this level. This way a butterfly bush is not going to be damaged by by wind, and it's not going to split the interior structure of the bush. And next year it comes better and bigger every year. Look at this, how beautiful it is. But this is a good example of a deciduous shrub. And of course trees. How can we forget trees? Trees bring us shade, bring us a relief from sun, gives perennials and annuals in our garden a little relief from the sun too. Also, don't underestimate the presence of trees. And trees can create a very long-lasting presence, so we have to make sure that we think very well where we want to plant our trees. Of course, trees mature and they take a lot of space in the garden, but there are plenty of beautiful dwarf varieties which can fit into any garden, whichever size the garden is. So now, if you know different type of plants which can be growing in your garden, hopefully you will go into the big box store and you will look at the shelves. And of course, on the shelves, the nurseries and big companies stock the shelves with beautiful plants which are blooming just at that time, because they want to entice the buyer to buy those beautiful plants. But I do encourage you not to look only at the plant and say to yourself, oh, this is where I'm going to plant it and this is how it's going to behave. No, look at the label, study what this plant is all about, but even better, go to the store with already a plan what you want to buy. This way you're not going to be surprised with this wonderful thing and that wonderful thing. Of course, it happens to all of us. I sometimes go into the nursery and I see this gorgeous, wonderful, what's the last thing I saw? I saw yellow peony. And I looked at it and right away in my head, the song is going, where in the world can I fit it in my garden? And I started to argue with myself, not to argue, to barter with myself. Maybe I can move this and put that thing here, and maybe let me just buy it. No, resist the temptation to do that. Come to the store with a plan what you need to buy, because this is the space for your garden. So my advice is to have a solid plan when you go shopping for your plants. Of course, it doesn't happen very often. We get tempted by beautiful things, and it's okay too. This is the adventure of being the gardener. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do subscribe if you like what I'm creating for you. Happy gardening, and I will see you next time.